Hi, I'm Justin Boyd.
And I'm Brittany Pacheco, and we are the Watchers in the Basement.
Welcome to the Watchers in the Basement. We are here today to discuss or to rewatch the Guardians of the Galaxy because, as you probably know, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 comes out on May 5th. We're recording this today on April 26th, so it's next Friday. Guardians 3. So we thought we'd get you ready for Guardians 3 by going back and talking about the previous two Guardians movies, starting with, of course, Guardians of the Galaxy for 2014. The release date was August 4th, 2014. A runtime of 2 hours, 1 minute. Love the runtime. Box office of 773 million. It did very well considering it was basically unknown characters. Directed by James Gunn, who would go on to direct Volume 2 and Volume 3, and who now is the co-CEO of DC Studios. And the cast includes, of course, Chris Pratt, Zoe Saldana, Dave Bautista, Lee Pace, Karen Gillan, Michael Rooker, Djimon, Honsou, Benicio del Toro, Vin Diesel, Bradley Cooper, John C. Reilly, and Glenn Close. And I should say that Guardians of the Galaxy is the 10th film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and the fourth movie of Phase 2. Now, Brittany, as you know, and as some of you watching will remember, late last year we reviewed the first 30 movies of the MCU. Now they're at 31 with Quantum Mania, but we used the 30 as the cutoff point to rank and review the movies. And we have that episode linked below in the description. So go check that out. See where we ranked Guardians of the Galaxy, the first movie. I went back today to look at it. And I was like, wow, we did not rank it where I personally rank it, because I think this is a top tier Marvel movie. Brittany, what are your memories, first of all, seeing this movie for the first time? Did you see it in the theater? And what are your kind of overall thoughts about the movie? And has your thoughts changed over the past 8 to 10 or 9 to 10 years?
Yeah, I was just going to say that probably the reason why it's ranked in our top 30 is probably because of me.
Yeah, I think you tanked it because
I did tank it. Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, Luna, she agrees with me on this, Justin. I'm sorry. Like, she and I, we're one. She's like, Mom, like this movie, come on, really, you're rewatching this, like, why?
Yeah.
And to answer your question, I don't recall if I did see this movie in theaters, just because it, like you said, it's a bunch of unknowns. And I literally just, not that I'm a comic book reader by any means. I'm not, what Marvel has produced. Luna's just very upset with me right now. Yeah. What Marvel has produced is strictly for movies and TV shows. That's all I've seen, right? I haven't read the source. Right. And so with Guardians, for me, one, it was just a bunch of unknowns. Granted, yes, there was a pretty good cast of like Zoe Saldana and Chris Pratt. Chris Pratt, I think this was a big turning point for him, right? And
yeah, we're gonna get into the casting. It was his kind of big break as a action star. Yeah.
And so, like, for me, like, I didn't know who Chris Pratt was because I didn't watch Parks and Rec. I still actually haven't. Yep. And yeah, like, and we'll talk about that later. But no, I didn't. To my knowledge, I did not see this in theaters. Quite honestly, I watched a lot of these Marvel movies like out of order until I really started getting into these movies. And so I feel like maybe that has a lot to do with maybe why I didn't particularly care for Guardians. Yeah, like it's not my favorite. It's really not my favorite franchise. This movie, however, out of the three, or I say out of the two for now, is definitely above Volume 2. And when we rewatch Volume 2, I'll definitely share my thoughts about that because it pains me that we're going to rewatch it.
Yeah. Volume 2 is not my favorite either. We'll talk about that next week, though. But for, I think Luna, the reason why she's so upset is because, we're talking about Guardians of the Galaxy. Because of that, she'd prefer to be called Cosmo the Space Dog for this while we're recording.
How dare you?
I know.
How dare you? Rude.
But speaking of Cosmo, Cosmo is a big character in Volume 3. And was a character in the holiday special. I'd forgotten that Cosmo is actually in Guardians 1 in a couple of quick little scenes, so that was kind of cool. But
low key, just didn't know. It didn't matter to me. And I thought the
Yeah.
first appearance of Cosmo was in the holiday special.
No,
And
they show the
apparently
dog a
not.
couple of times. Yeah, and
Apparently
then
not.
the post-credit scene, you see the
Yeah.
dog also. Yeah, but no. So this movie is very memorable for me because this was actually my first MCU movie that I saw in the theater. I was, as I mentioned before, I was very late to the MCU party. You actually kind of dragged me to it.
Yes, kicking and screaming you did.
Luna groans in the background. No, it was the first MCU movie I saw in the theater. I'd seen Iron at that point in 2014. I had seen Iron Man on TV, but I just really wasn't. And it wasn't like I didn't care about Marvel or at that point I just wasn't really into superheroes. I mean, like now it's like my favorite thing, but back then I just wasn't into it. I go through phases. Like I mean, around that same time, I did really enjoy the Dark Knight movies. The Dark Knight trilogy, it's some of my favorite movies of all time. But I don't know. I just wasn't really into. I mean, I've always been more of a DC person anyway, so that kind of makes sense. And but anyway, it was my first one in theaters. I went with my brothers. We both went. My my two brothers. We went to see the movie together, and mainly because we chose this movie because I thought, well, this. We grew up watching Star Wars. We love Star Wars, and when I say Star Wars, I mean A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and
The good Star Wars.
Return of the Jedi, the good Star Wars, exactly.
It
Return of the Jedi is going to be back in theaters this Friday, April 28th, which is your birthday, by the way. So,
is, isn't it?
it is, yeah. So check out Return of the Jedi in theaters, the 40th anniversary. It's going to come back. I think it's going to be in theaters for like a week or so. So
just disclaimer, I will not be turning 40. That's like not
no.
like association.
No, you're not turning 40. Return of the Jedi is turning 40.
Yeah.
So anyway, I might check that out if I get a chance. I don't know. We'll see.
That'd
But
be cool.
back to Guardians, because of my love for Star Wars, I wanted to go see this movie. And this movie it's a space epic. It's a space opera. And I think, as to this before, this movie is so much cooler than post Return of the Jedi Star Wars. This movie blows those movies out of the water. This is such a good movie. And I really think it's like it's a top tier Marvel movie to me. It's in my personal top 10. It's tough because the MCU has given us so many great movies, and I know recently people have been down on them, but there's a lot of bangers in there, and this is one of them to me. This is just an incredible film. I love I've seen this movie probably 10 times now, and I love it. I think it's funny. It's got a lot of heart. It introduced us to characters that I'd never heard of, and I think that's kind of the general the consensus about the general population is no one knew these characters basically, and it just delivers. There's so many great things about it. We're gonna go through it now, but
Yeah,
go ahead.
you mentioned how the fact that this movie was basically a bunch of unknowns, right? And again, not an avid comic book person ever.
Yeah.
It's kind of curious with the argument of like, oh, like this introduced a whole new set of characters in the Marvel universe and what have you, but then like people want to use that same argument about this current phase that we're in and saying, well, they're having to establish all these stories and new
Right.
characters, and it's like, yeah, because they had to do that in phase 1 and 2. Like, come on, people, like don't like use that argument when it's fitting. It has to start somewhere. You have to lay down foundation, and then people like Guardians, or if you're like me, don't particularly care for them. I don't know. It's just something I wanted to kind of point out.
And this movie is really kind of when Marvel really was exploding, because this movie, like I said, it's the 10th movie in the MCU, and I think it comes after Winter Soldier, and it's right before Age of Ultron. So it's right in that area where they're just starting to make billion-dollar movies, or they're kind of climbing up. And this movie really was kind of a flex by Marvel because you're expanding the universe, and literally you're taking Marvel to space and introducing these characters no one's heard of, and they just knocked it out of the park. They knocked it out of the galaxy. Honestly, it was such a hit, and
But
honestly, I don't know. I think it's one of the better Marvel movies. It's a really good movie. Honestly, I don't know if it's Rolling Stone, or I saw something where it was like one of the top 100 movies of the past 100 years. It made the list. It was like one of the only
wow,
Marvel. It's like it was the highest ranked Marvel movie on that list. So it's
impressive.
Yeah, it's critically acclaimed. It's got 92% of Rotten Tomatoes, so it's way up there. This movie, the one thing I that really stands out to me is obviously it's a space epic, so it's very CGI heavy, and the movie looks phenomenal. I mean, it looks so
Yeah.
much better than the current movies
Yes.
that are 10 years later, and that's simply because they put so much time and effort and manpower into making this movie. I mean, the CGI stuff looks pretty flawless. I mean, I don't, not that I'm like a CGI expert, but we always notice that stuff, even if you know nothing about that. You notice when it looks bad, and this one
Mhm.
looks excellent.
I will agree with you on that. Now, I once again not a huge Guardians fan. Period. This movie, I will say, out of technically the three that we've gotten, is ranked pretty high. I ranked. I like that holiday special just because it was
Yeah,
short, quick to the
yeah,
point. It was that one was fine. This movie, I agree wholeheartedly about the CGI of it because it really kind of made you feel like this was a real world and or a galaxy or whatever the case may be. And this is all pre-volume, right? The
oh
volume
yeah,
is something that most studios are using at this point. Disney, Game of Thrones, etc. And and I think because the care that went into creating the sets, the costume, the effects, and what have you, and post production, it's been almost 10 years since this movie has released, and yes, the CGI still looks great. It's held up. I'm going to compare it to that of Resident Evil. Resident Evil came out in what, like 2001, 2002, early 2000s. That CGI has not held up. It doesn't look good. But for this movie, yeah, CGI has like amazing qualities behind it. And to add to the positive of this movie, the soundtrack is banging. Like that
yeah,
soundtrack is awesome.
yeah. The
So good.
soundtrack, right, is the Awesome Mix Volume One, which is a collection of like 70s and 80s like pop songs, mostly 70s, I think, maybe exclusively 70s. I'm not sure, but
Well, because the
go ahead.
movie starts out in 88
Right.
and Peter Quill is what, 11, 12, give or take. I'm not quite sure if we do have a definitive age for him, but he's
Yeah.
not a child. He's also not a
Right.
teenager. And if it was set in 88, he was probably born in the mid 70s. So that would that would be fitting. That would be fitting.
Yeah, no doubt.
Mhm.
But the that album, which the soundtrack for the movie, it became the first soundtrack in movie history to that consists entirely of previously released songs. There's not an original song that was written for the film to be the top album on Billboard's top 200 chart. So it
That's
was like
quite the accomplishment.
the collection of songs that were already popular, that were varying degrees of popularity, mostly pretty big hits, but slap them together, give it the cool Guardians kind of dust on it, and it
Yeah.
shot up to number one. So it was very successful. And yeah, it's a huge part of the movie. The opening credits, they're pretty iconic. The come and get your love dance scene with Chris Pratt as a Star Lord
God.
dancing around, which was they revisit that scene in Avengers Endgame. So it was a very crucial
Yeah.
scene. Yeah.
And I'm glad you're talking about this because there's one thing that I wanted to kind of bring up. Just, me, I'm a big person on, I'm not a big person, but I'm big on continuity
Yeah.
and how everything played out. Of course, in Endgame, we're following Star Lord, Peter Quill, and he's come and get your love, singing into
Yeah.
like this little creature. And he gets knocked out by Rhodey or Nebula, one of the two, and they go retrieve one of the Infinity Stones. But what doesn't happen while they're on Morag is the arrival of Djimon Honsou. And I'm like, wait a minute, like we just completely eliminated his character because I totally forgot that that's how we first see him in this movie. And I'm just like,
Right.
because it happened almost immediately when Peter retrieved the Infinity Stone, and then it's like boom, they're in the temple, or I call it the
Right.
temple, but they're in that dwelling. And I'm like, they didn't do that in Endgame. Why?
Yeah, I don't know. There might have been a scheduling conflict. They couldn't get him back there, or just like they just didn't
Just
want
cut
to.
it out.
Well, I think the dance part was the more,
Iconic part of it.
iconic part of
Yeah.
to kind of as a scene setter. That was what was more important. So
And you know what? Great call on that, because obviously Chris Pratt had to, redo that whole scene, right? And you actually hear him singing,
right,
and for Rhodey and Nebula to be like, so he's an idiot. Yeah.
yeah. And speaking of Chris Pratt, it's a good place to start talking about the cast. Chris Pratt, of course, is Peter Quill / Star Lord in the movie. His character is kind of he's kind of like a Han Solo kind of character, so it kind of continues that like Star Warsy kind of theme that I think was a reason why the movie was a hit, and the reason why, like, Han Solo is kind of the coolest guy in Star Wars, and that's really what Peter Quill and Star Lord is in this movie. I mean, in kind of a more of like in a lovable comedic way, whereas Han Solo was just kind of cool because he was cool. Um, but Pratt, it's interesting because this was like I mentioned before, this is his breakout role to becoming an action star. This is right before he got the Jurassic World movies.
Yeah.
Like right now, he's the voice of Mario in the #1 movie in the world. It just passed $900 million at the box office. Like, he's one of the biggest movie stars in the world. But back then, he was the tubby guy in Parks and Rec, the tubby funny guy in Parks and Rec, and then
Mm-hmm.
he initially he lost the weight before auditioning for Star Lord because he was in movies like Moneyball and Zero Dark 30, but those were kind of like he wasn't like the lead character in those movies.
Yeah.
And but then he auditioned for this movie and he got it. And it took a while, but he finally got it, and they finally determined he was the guy. And I think it's like a perfect choice, and he um I don't know. I think he nails the character. It's like a perfect performance. And I think it's his best character because like I don't like the Jurassic World movies.
No.
I mean, in Mario, I mean, they made a big deal. People made a big deal about how he's the voice of Mario. He's
Mhm.
neither good or bad. He's like, I mean, Mario, the character, the video game character, doesn't say a lot anyway. So, I mean, the movie, he has more dialogue than a video game, but I saw that movie and I like the movie a lot, but
Mhm.
you forget that it's him because it's the video game character that you grew up with. It's not like he says nothing like one way or the other that makes you go, oh my God, that's Chris Pratt. It just sounds like somebody acting like he's, Mario. So,
Hmm. I equate that to when Ryan Reynolds voiced Detective Pikachu. I didn't see that movie, but I that was like odd casting, and I feel the same way for Chris Pratt being Mario. That's beside the point. I haven't seen the movie, so I can't like really speak on it.
yeah.
Chris Pratt for me is kind of like how I feel about Will Ferrell. I can't quite pinpoint what it is I don't particularly care about their acting style or what it truly is. I just know that I don't hate the guy, but I also don't care for the guy, if that makes any sense whatsoever. His performance is fine. Like his performance is fine in these movies. I kind of think it's a little cheeseball, but if that's the direction that the, the production team was going for, director, producers, etc. Okay, cool. You nailed it with Chris Pratt, because again, I never watched Parks and Rec. I've seen like maybe a couple clips here and there that have been sent to me by my brother who has watched Parks and Rec, but like I just I don't see it. I don't see the appeal.
Yeah. I mean, his character was it's a silly, funny show. It's much like The Office, it's
But
just,
if we're gonna typecast him to be that silly kind of character that you can't take serious, then
yeah.
okay, fine. Then yes, I will agree that Peter Quill / Star Lord is a good fitting for Chris Pratt. But I have seen him in a couple of other movies as well. But there's like the one with Jennifer Lawrence. What was it? Passenger.
Yeah.
That was fine. It was okay.
Yeah.
Nothing that wows me. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, it's fair. I think he's really good in this role, though. I think this is, like I said, I think this is his best role that I've seen him in, and I think it's a good mixture of being the action star, but also being funny, and I think he brings a lot of humor to this movie.
Sure.
So moving on to the cast, Zoe Saldana is Gamora. Uh, Something really interesting about this movie is that you know you notice with all the characters, with Gamora, with Drax, with what's his name, with Ronan the Accuser, with Yondu, they're
Mhm.
all wearing this like face makeup. It's not CGI.
Yeah.
It's makeup, and
Yep.
all these actors, like,
Prosthetics,
yeah,
that kind
all
of
these
thing.
actors, they went through like 3 to 4 hours every day of that kind of makeup,
Hmm.
and it looks great. Like if you look at it, it looks like you're like is Gamora a green person? Like is Yondu really blue? Because it's done so well, but it's like
It is.
that's something I think we forget about when we watch these movies, like the amount of time that goes into making these characters look as good as they do. There's a lot of
Mhm.
work, and it's a daily thing. So
I will say Gamora has the hair that I've always wanted. Like I have naturally very dark hair,
uh,
but like the dark hair that fades into like the kind of purpley red sort of color, violet type color. Man, if that wasn't so much maintenance, I would have that for the rest of my life. But it's costly. But anyway, yeah, no, the look of their to separate like this, I guess you could say species, right? Drax is probably the most intricate of these characters, right? With like, I don't know if it's you call it tribal type scarring or
it's
just
like tattoos, kind of. It's
it's
kind of like a
kind of like
yeah, yeah,
yeah, but they're more raised,
right,
so it's kind of like a relief. But
right,
yeah, his is really intricate, and to put that next to like that of Rocket, and he's a raccoon. Of course, everyone calls him a rabbit,
yeah,
or one dude calls him a hamster, which I think is so random.
yeah,
Put him next to put the likes of Drax and Gamora and everyone else who has like the facial makeup, prosthetics, what have you. It's pretty believable next to that of like the CGI characters. It's like, wow, these there really are so many different kinds of species like in this area of the galaxy that has yet to be explored. And it looks good. Like I said with the CGI, it holds up. It holds up nearly 10 years later.
mhm,
It's very impressive. And I think that's once again, when you have the time, you have the manpower, you have the resources, and you're
yep,
not just pumping out episodes for Disney Plus and movies and what have you. Marvel produces great quality work. You know,
yep,
it's and that's something I can't deny from this movie.
yep. Just kind of finishing up on Gamora, Zoe Saldana plays Gamora in this movie. She's a green character, and she's also in the Avatar movies where she's a
Avatar.
blue character. So that's kind of funny. And
Yeah.
then uh, Drax, who's played by Dave Bautista, which is this much like Chris Pratt. This is his big breakout role, in movies. He was a famous professional wrestler.
Hmm.
He'd done some movie work, but this was his like first big movie role.
Wasn't he
And
more in stunt work prior to this? I
no,
think I think I,
he was a wrestler,
no,
but
no, but what I'm saying when he was trying to get into the movie industry, he was doing like kind of
oh,
stunt work type thing.
maybe, but I mean, he's in like low budget action movies,
Ah,
like that were like straight to video or straight to DVD or whatever. So,
yeah, okay. Gotcha.
um, so it's his kind of his big break in the movies. And I mentioned the color the color changes for Zoe Saldana, but for the character Drax in the comics, Drax was kind of a bright green, and so
Oh,
they changed it to
interesting.
like a muddier gray because they didn't want it to look like the Hulk.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So,
Real quick, Justin, want to give a shout out to McDorks. Says hello, amazing friends. Hello,
oh,
thank you for joining. We're chatting about we're chatting about Guardians of the Galaxy. What is this reaction thing now? What in the world? What's that's new? Okay, yeah, sure. We'll go with that. So yeah, let us know, Christian, if I'm sure you have seen Guardians of the Galaxy. Let us know your thoughts about the movie.
yeah, but then with Drax, the character himself, I love how he doesn't understand metaphors. Everything that's said to him, he takes literally. I think that obviously works well with Chris Pratt's humor, and Yeah, I mean,
That
just
does bounce off pretty well.
yeah,
Like when Chris is or Star-Lord is doing the, the gesture of the kill me, the thumb across the neck, and Drax is like, "What?" Like, just really goes over his head.
yeah,
And he's like, "Nothing goes over my head. I will catch it," or something along those
yeah,
lines, right?
yeah. I mean,
I don't know what that's like. I'm really short, so.
right. No, it's like these band of misfits. It's such a great pairing of all these people together. And moving on with the cast, let's get to Groot, the tree-like humanoid, who is voiced by Vin Diesel, and who only says "I am Groot," except for later in the movie he says "We are Groot," which is kind of the emotional end where he.
Totally forgot about that.
Oh wow, no, that's a big part of the movie.
Yeah,
So
I totally
yeah,
forgot. I've only seen this movie, I think, willingly, a less than a handful of times.
okay,
So, forgive me.
yeah, but it really is surprising that Vin Diesel was the guy that got the role of Groot. I mean, he actually. I mean, as insane as it sounds, because he literally only says "I am Groot." He put a ton of work into it, so it's like it.
I mean, at one point, he really does yell it out, like with that ferocity and like, "I am Groot," like it,
Yeah,
But he does it also in like however many different languages.
yeah, many foreign languages he does it. Yeah, so
How many?
I don't know. I just know it's
Oh, okay.
several, many. Yeah, yeah.
I thought you said like 94, and I'm like,
No, no, no.
wow,
I
what?
don't. I don't know. No, I know it's several. It's very many.
Yeah,
So
he does it. He does quite a bit.
yeah, it's interesting, because like the voice actors in this movie at the time this movie came out, they were bigger stars, and I guess probably still are bigger stars than the main live action people. But
Mm,
like Rocket Raccoon is played by Bradley Cooper, which at this time, in 2014, Bradley Cooper is coming off the
The
Hangover,
Hangover.
the first couple Hangover movies, I believe, and certainly the
Yeah,
first one was out. So
yeah.
he was a big star. Obviously, he's still a very big star.
Yes, he
But
is.
yeah. So I think Rocket is. I don't know if he's the best character, but he's a great character in this movie. I think he might actually be the main character in the trilogy from the way the volume 3 looks like it's going to play out. But
Hmm.
what did you think about Bradley Cooper as Rocket Raccoon?
See, I'm good. I'm good with Rocket. Like I'm good with him, and it's kind of funny because for me personally, I don't hear Bradley Cooper at all. Like for me, I truly forget that Bradley Cooper voices Rocket because it's such a completely different tone, different way of speaking, and it truly shows the talent that actors possess when they go from like live action, like they're on screen, they themselves the actor, versus like voice acting. You can really transform. And I think that's what's so amazing about Rocket. And at this time we don't even know like how he's a talking raccoon other than just he's been experimented on. You see like the bolts and such when I'm going to fast forward really quickly when the Guardians, they're not the group Guardians yet, but they're all imprisoned together and they're being processed and you see Rocket shirtless and you see, like I said, the nuts and bolts that are uh,
Yeah,
on his back. He's been experimented on, and he kind of goes into it later in the movie about how he didn't ask to be ripped apart and all this stuff. So that there's a sad story behind Rocket,
right.
and that was introduced to us in this movie. And I think you're right with the third movie that's about to premiere. We're definitely going to get a lot more of a Rocket backstory.
Yeah, we're gonna get the Rocket arc will be paid off definitely. It seems.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, he's also despite being a raccoon, he doesn't know what a raccoon is. He's
Nope.
very offended by any reference to obviously being called vermin or being called a rodent. Later on, of course,
Yes.
Thor calls him a rabbit. So
Sweet rabbit.
rabbit, yeah,
I mean, Asgardians call him Rabbit too, so it must be an Asgardian thing. I don't know.
yeah.
Bless their hearts, as we say here in Texas.
But he's a great character. Yeah, and you're right. It doesn't. You do kind of forget it's Bradley Cooper because it doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily sound like Bradley Cooper from the movies that we've all seen. It's
No,
yeah,
no. I mean, if you were to, and this is a very wide stretch of comparison. You look at Robin Williams and his catalog of when he's Robin Williams, the actor is in front of the camera versus when he's doing voice acting. You know it's Robin Williams because it's pretty much the same voice, whereas this is a complete transformation.
Yeah.
So Christian says, rocket shirt, eh? Grr. Okay. We're into that apparently.
So moving on, we have Lee Pace. He's the main villain.
Hometown boy.
Yep. Ronan the Accuser. Did you know Lee Pace originally auditioned to play Peter Quill?
I actually did know that. Yes.
Okay.
I don't remember the full story behind it, but I do remember hearing that he did an audition. Oh, Christian said he meant shirtless.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. Rocket shirtless. Oh, now I see it, Christian. My bad. Yeah. You're funny. But yeah, Lee Pace. Lee Pace does a great villain. You know, and he also in a way in The Hobbit, he's very villainous like. He just has that vibe. He really can portray a villain to top tier level, in my personal opinion. He's got that great voice that sounds very sinister, and like you don't want to mess with him, right?
Yeah,
I love him.
2014 was a big year for him because one of those Hobbit movies came out in 2014 also.
Yes. So. Yes. Yeah, Lee Pace. Way to represent Houston. I mean, I know you're from Spring, but like, hey, you're
close
still from
enough.
Houston.
Close enough.
Close. Yeah. It's a burb.
Right.
It's a burb.
Yeah. Then we have
Houston's an hour away from Houston anyway, so it's fine.
That's true. That is very true. Then we have Michael Rooker as Yondu.
Wonderful. Just a wonderful performance.
Yeah. And I mean, we'll get to it next week, but
can he really do that whistle? Can he really whistle that well? Or do you think it's an instrument that's kind of dubbing his ability to whistle?
I think he's getting some help, but
okay.
Who knows? Maybe it's a natural thing he can do. That'd be awesome if it is.
I mean, to be able to have the lung capacity to hold a long note of a whistle, because that whistle is basically guiding this arrow, right? That he controls with some device that's on his head. And I don't know. I think that was the one thing with Yondu, other than him being blue, that really captivated me. But also the exchange he has with that collector, broker type person, whoever it was that Quill was going to, give the orb to for some client, right? And when Yondu's talking to him, like, you're going to tell me, about this client of yours, and person starts going into it, and he just this gibberish, and I'm like, this is fantastic. That I really enjoyed.
Yeah, he kind of plays like a surrogate father for Peter Quill. I mean, obviously that's a bigger role in
way of putting it, but yeah.
In volume 2, that's a big part of the movie.
That's very true. Yes, absolutely. There's also another Disney character that's referenced, but we'll get to that in volume 2.
There you go. Yep. And then finally, rounding out the main cast, we have Karen Gillan as Nebula. She shaved her head to do this, which I guess makes sense, but I'd never really thought about the fact that she had to shave her head. I guess she's had to shave her head for all of the appearances.
Truth be told, I'm not sure. It's very possible that, she was just so committed to the first movie that's what she decided to do. Yeah. I'm sure the maintenance on that was ridiculous, probably like every 2 days, right? To keep it, smooth, bald, and what have you. I mean, there are bald caps that actors use, and then they'll put the makeup, the prosthetics, whatever on top of it. But okay, Christian here says she only did it for the first movie.
Okay,
that makes sense. Yeah. And I think I'm trying to remember, did Jumanji come out in 2014 as well, or was that like following?
I've never seen those movies. I know she's been in a couple. Are there 2 of them or 3 of them?
I think there's 2. Actually, I really don't know. I know I've seen the first one. She was great in the first movie, and seeing her as Karen Gillan versus seeing her as Nebula, wow, gorgeous person. Like, my goodness. And what was most impressive to me, Justin, is that she's Scottish, and she's got a Scottish accent.
Right.
And you don't hear, in my opinion,
No,
an
because in this
ounce of
movie,
that accent in this
yeah,
movie.
Nebula's voice is a very like it's a very kind of gruff. It's one of the things that people kind of like, you know, mimic or make fun of.
Mm.
And apparently she was trying to do an impression, a simultaneous impression of Marilyn Monroe and Clint Eastwood at the same time. So,
Oh, wow. What a
which
combination.
once you hear that and then think about how she sounds, it does make a lot of sense.
Oh my god, yes,
Yeah.
I can hear it now. I can see it now. The kinda look of, like, a Clint Eastwood and then the voice. I get it. I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah, Christian says he's been a fan of her since Doctor Who. I forgot that she's in Doctor
Yeah,
Who.
I was gonna mention that she was
Mhm.
pretty famously that's kinda I think that's
Yes.
kinda where she got her start was Doctor Who.
'Cause I think she's the first female doctor. Christian, tell me if I'm wrong. But he
Yeah.
says he
I
freaking
won't know
loves her.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. But she did wear bald caps for the remainder of her appearances in the movies. So that makes total sense. Yeah, no, she's great. She's great. She seems like someone as Nebula you really don't wanna mess with. Like, and she's like kind of like a cyborg kind
Yeah.
of person. Okay, I'm wrong. She is not the first female Doctor Who. My apologies. But thank you for letting me know. So yeah, with Nebula, you see just like there's parts of her all over her body that are mechanic. And she's a sister, or she's the sister to Gamora, and they seem to have, bad blood to some degree, mostly on Nebula's part. But yeah.
Well, I mean, Thanos right in front of her basically says that,
Yes.
that Gamora is his favorite daughter. So,
Yes.
that doesn't help. And
Thanos.
speaking of Thanos, this was like our first good look at Thanos, right? So
Yeah.
he was briefly shown in Avengers at the very end
Mhm.
in one of the post-credit scenes, but
Mhm.
this is the first kind of full-on shot. I know he looks different, the next time we see him, which is in Infinity War, he looks a little bit different, but I thought Thanos looked really cool and looked really menacing, and
Yes.
definitely like you tell that this is like the big bad that the Avengers are going to have to help
Yeah.
people like the Guardians of the Galaxy come together to take down
Yeah. And
this foe.
it's still Josh Brolin. Like, I think the
Yeah,
voice is slightly altered to some degree because I don't feel it's the same voice that continued in Infinity War and
no,
in Endgame.
Josh Brolin does the voice in this
No, I
movie.
know.
He's not credited, yeah, but he
Yeah, I know.
wasn't the voice of Thanos in Avengers, the first Avengers.
No, I know that. I know that. But what I'm saying is, to me, in Guardians, Josh Brolin voicing Thanos, it sounds just slightly different. I don't know if
Okay,
maybe he
yeah,
decided to change the direction with the more appearances he'd make in Infinity and Endgame. Doesn't really matter to me. I think it's great that at least we had a designated actor to be Thanos, and that was who was going to continue on. But yeah, this was the real first good look at Thanos and seeing how he would double cross anyone really at this point, even with Ronan. They had like a what do you call it? A pact that if Ronan delivered the Infinity Stone to Thanos, Thanos would destroy the Nova Corps, which is where Quill and others reside. And for whatever reason, I guess because what was it? The peace treaty between the Kree, which is what Ronan is, and the Nova Corps, there was some treaty drawn up that's like, hey, no more war type situation. And Ronan's like, nope, not about that life. And I'm a, get Thanos. And he's
yeah,
basically just his puppet. Yeah.
yeah. Speaking of Thanos, he was like on the set. He was played by Sean Gunn, who is James Gunn's brother, who also plays Kraglin, who is Yondu's first mate in the Ravengers, and he also portrayed he was Rocket on
Rocket.
set.
Hmm.
So Sean Gunn was busy. He was
He was. I
happy
was
to
gonna
help his brother's production. Yeah.
ask you if he was related to James Gunn or if that was
Oh yeah.
just
Yep.
coincidence, but
No.
now we know. The more you know.
Yeah.
Ding ding
Yeah.
ding.
And he's going to be in the new DCU.
Of course he is.
Yeah, in the Creature Commandos, which is the one of the first things for the DCU. I think it's coming out
Ah,
next year. It's going to be a animated series, but the people who are voicing the characters will also appear in live action. So
oh, okay. Interesting.
he's going to play one of those characters. So
Cool.
yeah,
Yeah.
very cool.
Hmm.
So let's get to kind of we've already talked about the opening credits dancing scene. We can talk
Mhm.
about the dance off to save the universe. But what are some of your like memorable moments from this movie?
I think when they travel to nowhere and I think it was the assumption of like, well, nowhere's not a real place. It's like, no, it really is.
Right.
And it's kind of like this planet, and it's not even a planet really. It's inside the head of a is it an eternal? A celestial?
Celestial, yeah, right.
Celestial. Right. And that was also kind of the first appearance of the beings that we would eventually see in the Eternals, right? Again, something I completely forgot about. I've seen this movie less than 5 times for sure. So, yeah, it was interesting to see like a civilization that built off of this celestial head because of like the resources that were inside of it, and it's used for like black market sales and that kind of thing. So yeah, Christian says it is a celestial.
Yeah.
Hey Mel, we got geeking out with Melly Mel here in the chat. Appreciate you being here. Love you. Talking about Guardians of the Galaxy. Let us know your thoughts on the movie. So yeah, Nowhere was pretty cool because that's where we get to meet the collector, and who's played by none other than Benicio del Toro, which I thought was a hilarious casting because never in my life would I've expected that. But then later on, we would see him in Star Wars as a kind of a different character, and I'm like, okay, cool, like we'll go with that, right? But Benicio del Toro looks great. I like the costume that they came up with him, the hair, so it's like a white hair kind of thing, and he's here to collect things, and that's when we see Cosmo for the very first time. He's got a dark elf that's also
Yeah.
in his collection, which is I'm trying to remember if Thor: Dark World came out after this movie or
I think it
before.
came out before.
It came out before. Okay. So, little nuggets here and there, right? With some of his collections, in the end, post credit scene.
Howard
It
the Duck.
shows Howard the Duck, probably one of the worst movies I've ever seen in my life. And the fact that it's affiliated with Marvel just like blows my mind. Like
Yep.
every single time I think about it, and I'm like, wow, Howard the Duck is part of this universe. Okay, cool. Not. But yeah, like it's cool. He apparently the collector treats his employees poorly. One's also in his collection. The other is just pretty uh she's got a plan. She's got a plan when the Guardians arrive.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and, that's also where we kind of the collector kind of gives us a tutorial about the Infinity Stones.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd kind of forgotten about that too. Like this is like I said earlier, this is kind of when Marvel was really kind of hitting its stride or really, getting it was moving on. We're getting to the big stuff, and yeah, there's like you also
Mhm.
said, there's a lot of Easter eggs in this movie.
There are.
It's a very visually, stimulating movie. There's stuff to look at everywhere.
Well, even with, like, with the orb, just the look of the
Yeah,
orb, and then how that opens up and you see, like, this purple infinity stone, and how when the collector's employee, because I have no idea what to call her, servant?
yeah,
Slave? Really don't like using those terms, but anyway, she basically did say to him, "I won't be your slave anymore." She grabs it, and then you see what that stone does to her. It just completely, like, obliterates her and everything within, like, a certain radius, and I was like, "Okay, this thing is not to be messed with." And, of course, by this point, we've already seen Infinity Stones, like, we just didn't realize that's what they were,
that's what they were. Yeah,
but that was, like, the first time we really I think that's the first time we really got to see just how powerful these stones are, and laying that foundation for why Thanos would want these stones, right? Because he wants to ultimately snap away half the universe. So, yeah.
yeah. It's a big Infinity Saga building
Mhm.
episode, or this movie is for the Infinity Saga. So yeah.
Yeah.
So what'd you think about the dance off at the end?
God. I
It's like
think,
a kind of like a Footloose kind of like homage. And he mentioned Kevin Bacon earlier in the
yeah,
movie, which that was obviously paid off in the uh,
holiday special.
holiday special. Yeah,
And I'm glad. I'm glad when movies do this, like they mention something in the very first, and then it finally pays off, like at the end of the saga or whatever. And the fact that he, was it an Infinity War? Yeah, it was Infinity War when he's like talking about Footloose or Kevin Bacon. Bacon. It's like, was isn't it? Is it still the greatest movie that ever was made? It's like, no, it never was. Like, it's just damn. Like, give this guy a break, okay? He left Earth in '88. He wouldn't have known any better. But with his love for Kevin Bacon and how he tries to impress Gamora about whatever it is that they're talking about and on Nowhere as they wait for the collector to collect them, he's talking about Kevin Bacon and how he changed his town by this dance off and whatever. And then he decides in the end with Ronan, I'm gonna do what Kevin Bacon does and challenge him to a dance off. Ooh, child. Just like he does the Michael Jackson kick, and then and Ronan's just like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm distracting you, dummy, kind of situation.
yeah, it's the perfect distraction to
Yeah.
get the orb out of his obsession. So
Yeah.
it worked.
It worked, but it's such a stupid concept. The fact that it worked from an '80s movie. Like, what?
But we talked about this earlier, but that's part of why this movie has such a great
Yeah.
appeal, like the mass appeal, because of not only like the '80s references, but the music, which is mostly from the '70s.
Yes.
Like that's why a lot of people who like wouldn't consider themselves to be comic book fans or or superhero fans, because this movie like is not really a superhero movie.
No.
Like it's uh no one really has superpowers per se, but
No. None whatsoever.
no, it's like I said, it's a very cooler, more modern version of what Star Wars, what Star Wars was in the '70s and '80s.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I definitely get the essence of it, and I think they executed it well. It's still just not part of my top 10 and
I know.
never will be.
You
Sorry.
really tanked it in the vote, so
I know.
your
I
fault.
know.
Yeah,
Yeah, that is my fault.
your
That's
fault.
something I happily accept.
So we talked about it a little bit earlier, but let's talk a little more about Groot. Groot has the big sacrifice moment where he saves the group by he, you know, basically turns into this, this giant like tree ball, I guess, to protect
Dome.
them. Yeah,
Yeah.
and sacrifices himself. He says, "We are Groot," and it's a pretty emotional scene. I didn't forget about that scene, but I forgot about how in the moment it's a pretty touching scene.
Yeah. I forgot that he actually says we are Groot
Yeah,
because throughout the whole movie, and I'm sure someone out there has counted how many times he says I am Groot in each one of these movies.
yeah,
I completely forgot that he says it. I did not forget about the dome that he creates to protect everyone and sacrifice himself. He had actually some really cool abilities outside of just being a really tall walking tree, right?
right.
He was able to kind of extend his limbs, if you will, to try to wrap up people. On Nowhere, he was able to like create like a little flower or something to hand off to one of the little children who were like begging for money or something. And when they are, I think they are trying to get onto Ronan's ship to disarm it and all that stuff. It's very dark, no one can see, and he Groot just like kind of reaches out his hands, and like these little, I don't know if it's like fireflies or something, but something emerges from his hand, arm, and it just illuminates the room. And so it's like Groot has some cool abilities. Like, I
Oh yeah,
mean, no one has like special super. Oh, he might be the exception because again, he can extend his limbs. That's how he was able to pull the battery out when they were in prison. They had like this big plan to escape, and Rocket's going through this plan, telling Quill and Gamora, and you see Groot in the background just like doing his own thing, reaching for the thing that needed to be done last. And it's like, okay, now we're gonna improvise.
yeah,
So it's Groot's a great character. I really, for someone who just says I am Groot all day long,
yeah.
it's a great character.
That's all he says. But I do like how Rocket, because of their friendship, their closeness. Like he
Mhm.
knows what, depending on how he says "I am Groot," he knows what that means in the moment.
Yeah,
So
he
because
does.
as we see, Peter Quill's like he's like, yeah, I know that you've said that 85 times. Like I know, like I am Groot. Like this is gonna wear thin real quick.
Yeah, but then Rocket says something that's like, well, he don't speak good. He don't speak good like we do. I mean, just horrible grammar on Rocket's part, but
Yeah,
it's to illustrate the point that Groot doesn't speak like they do.
right.
It's so silly.
Rocket is like the planner of the group. It's
Yeah.
and there's one part where he's like, you know what? Like he's saying like, he kind of gets mad at Groot. He's like, you're an idiot. And he's like, you know what? I'm the idiot. I'm the one that partnered with the tree. Like, so
I mean, I need a Groot origin story as well, right?
yeah,
I know Groot has a little mini series
yeah,
on Disney Plus. I've checked out a couple of them, but I haven't seen everything. Yeah, like the fact that later on when Thor will kind of join up with the Guardians in Infinity War and he understands Groot.
right.
It's like, what? Like how? Because
Yeah.
Peter Quill didn't. When they first met, I think at some point he kind of, I guess, can interpret whatever I am Groot.
I think in volume 2 he kind of starts to understand Groot, but
Yeah,
I mean it's a different Groot in volume 2.
yeah, and
Yeah,
same in Infinity War.
yeah.
So definitely different Groot in Infinity War, and I think that's where he's like, "Whoa, like watch your mouth," kind of thing. So yeah,
So,
that's interesting.
so speaking of Groot, to kind of finish it. What did you think about Baby Groot dancing to the Jackson 5 at the end?
Oh my god, it's like the cutest thing because after the ultimate sacrifice that is Groot,
Yeah,
Rocket's just beside himself. He picks up like this little twig. It's like a little last remnant of Groot,
yeah,
and kudos to Drax for trying to kind of like comfort Rocket, but he like pets him, on
yeah,
top of the head,
yeah,
and Rocket's kind of like, "What the frack are you
yeah,
doing?" Yeah, they ultimately decide to plant that little twig in a little pot, and Groot is gonna. It's kind of like a phoenix, Phoenix dies and it's reborn from its ashes. So same idea, right? As plants, you can replant something, it'll grow. Baby Groot dancing to Jackson 5 is just adorable because he's so tiny. Drax is in the background, I guess, cleaning his weapon, and Groot's getting down,
yeah,
he's boogieing, what have you, and Drax would like look, and then Groot would freeze,
yeah.
and then it's just back and forth kind of thing. It's adorable. I was gifted a chia pet type thing
Oh
of
yeah,
Baby Groot in the little pot, and I did planted seeds on its head, and it did sprout little plants. So that was kind of fun. That was cool.
yeah, yeah. The Baby Groot is super cute, and
Mhm.
neither one of us are fans of Volume 2. I don't know.
No,
Maybe when I watch it next week, I'll feel slightly different. I don't think I will, but the
Groot's
one
the
that
only saving grace in that movie.
yeah, no, the opening scene when he's dancing around that's a great scene, and
Yeah,
yeah,
that
so
really is. Everything goes downhill after that.
I'm
Like,
looking
just
forward to watching that scene again.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's the only thing I'm looking forward to.
yeah. So Brittany, is there anything else you want to bring up? Do you have any, or do I get to final thoughts on the movie?
I mean, it's fine. It's quality visually. It's
Yeah,
quality. For me, like I've mentioned earlier with Chris Pratt, there's just I'm not wowed, but for this role, I think it's a good fit for sure. I love seeing Zoe Saldana. Like I've watched her. I think the very first movie I ever saw her in was in something called Center Stage. She's a ballerina. She actually did, dance ballet back in the day, and just kind of seeing her progress as an actor. She's been in Pirates of the Caribbean in the first movie. She's been in Avatar. She's obviously been in this franchise. So like she's killing it. Like she's doing very well for herself.
Star Trek movies. Yeah,
Star Trek movies, yep. How could I forget that? She's badass. She's badass in this movie. The fight scene when she first meets Quill to take the orb, and just that whole sequence of the running back and forth and trying to lay each other out. It's it's really impressive. Because I feel like Zoe would be someone that you wouldn't want to mess with on the street.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I like I like parts of this movie. Don't get me wrong. I think there's some great like one-liners in here that I can't recall off the top of my head. Sorry, but soundtrack is amazing. Visually, it looks really great. I love Lee Pace as like one of the villains. The look of him is just very interesting with like the black kind of smudging around his face and I don't know what you call his headgear, but how it kind of drapes around the shoulders. It's cool. It's a cool look. It's a very cool, like almost ninja samurai esque, like someone you clearly can see he's the enemy in a way.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's good. There's good in this movie. There's stuff I'm just like, eh. Like I looked at my phone a lot because it doesn't hold my interest. Sorry. I really try not to do that, but yeah, this movie just doesn't really hold my interest. What about you, Justin?
No, I really enjoyed the movie. I think it's, like I said, one of the top tier Marvel movies, and it's, I think James Gunn's greatest accomplishment is, he makes you care about these people immediately. Like the fact that he made Groot and Rocket such major characters.
Yeah.
Like it's really impressive, and I mean, who would think that you would like fall in love with a tree or a talking raccoon? Like, but
Yeah.
it does, and he creates this group right away in this movie where, I mean, they're gonna have 3 movies, but then they were in 2 Avengers movies, and they were also in Thor: Love and Thunder briefly, and obviously the holiday special. So like, this is this is the start of a big, a big quadrant of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and of course, in Volume 3, I think we're gonna lose a lot of those characters, or certainly even the ones who are going to survive. It sounds like they're not going to be, the actors who are playing those characters won't be coming back because James Gunn's leaving. So
yeah,
it's
we for sure know of one.
Yeah, well, I think Zoe Saldana said something the other day that she hopes that if Marvel continues with Gamora, that they'll recast her. So
Interesting. Well,
that's
they've been doing this for some 10 years. Being these actors, and I get it. Everything will run its course at some point. You want to move on from being that character, and some people embrace it. Some people just like, hey, if I could be this role for the rest of my life, like I'd be cool with that. But I get it. I totally get it. I'm okay with this potentially being the last we'll see of the Guardians, with Volume 3 coming out next week. I'm perfectly okay with that.
Yeah.
It too has run its course.
They've had a good run. They've had a great run, honestly. Like,
it could have ended after Volume 2, just saying.
From, little to little known characters to being major players in the MCU, like that's great accomplishment by James Gunn and by Marvel to pull that off. So, So,
one thing, Justin, before we go, and it kind of is a good like cliffhanger for what we'll see with Volume 2 with the opening of this movie. Like I said, it's set in 88. It's Missouri. That's where Peter Quill is from. His mom's dying. His mom's dying of terminal sort of, cancer. Illness. It's cancer.
Yep.
She talked about his father and how, oh, you're so like your father, and he was an angel, and he's gonna come get you, and
he's made out of light.
Made out of light, and you don't really realize the importance of everything that she says at that moment, even when he's holding the Infinity Stone, which is kind of like, how is he able to do this? Because well, not every, but the only other person that we saw do this like completely obliterated, he's able to hold on to it and it's not killing him. But he sees a vision of his mother in her deathbed, and she asked him to take her hand, and you hear Gamora in the background, take my hand, take my hand. But again, that scene alone of his mother talking about his father very much plays into Volume 2.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. You can tell like the seeds for the sequel were planted in this movie.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But we will talk about Volume 2 next week. So anyway, we want to know, like, now you know what we think about Guardians of the Galaxy 1. We want to know what you think about it. And Brittany, how can people tell us what they think about the movie?
We encourage everyone to join us for the live chat, just like Mel did here, Geeking Out with Melly and Mel, as well as McDorks, Christian and Michael from McDorks. Appreciate both of you being here and love hearing your thoughts about Guardians of the Galaxy and just hanging out with us. We really appreciate it. It's fun to engage with those in the chat. If you're watching the replay, leave a comment down below and let us know your thoughts about Guardians of the Galaxy. And don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. It really means a lot. We are on the road now. I'm trying to think. We've already surpassed 250 subscribers. So thank you to everyone.
Yeah.
We're almost at 260. We're one away from 260, y'all. Let's one of you click subscribe. Appreciate it. Yeah. But outside of joining us here on the live chat, you can also find us on social media. That's Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Handle is at Watchers Basement. We also use that same handle for a hashtag to help grow our audience. If there's something that you want us to review, use that hashtag, because that's the easiest way that we'll be able to find your tweet, your comment, whatever the case may be. Yeah, use that hashtag. And not only are we here for video podcasts on YouTube, you can also listen to our audio podcasts available on Apple, Google, and Spotify. What's cool about Spotify, though, as you pointed out previously, Justin, is that it also plays our video, but it looks cool because it's tiny. It looks even better. I don't know why, but yeah, check us out on any one of those platforms. Give us a 5-star rating. Don't forget to follow us there as well. That way you don't miss out on the latest from the Watchers in the Basement.
Thank you, Brittany. So for Brittany, this is Justin saying we'll see you next week when we review Guardians of the Galaxy. Rewatch Guardians of the Galaxy 2 or Volume 2. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week. Have a good night. Bye-bye.